A few months ago, I was bored out of my mind. Life had become a monotonous cycle of work, eat, sleep, and repeat. One night, after aimlessly scrolling through forums and social media, I found myself exploring the hidden corners of the internet. I had heard rumors about the dark web before, but I had never ventured that far. It always seemed like a bad idea, sketchy, illegal, and full of things better left unseen. But that night, I was curious, bored, and looking for something to spice up my life. I'm not some thrill seeker or criminal. I'm just an average guy, living in a small town, doing a regular 9-to-5 job. I've always loved puzzles and riddles, something my grandpa got me into when I was a kid. He used to say, "The world is full of puzzles. You just have to look close enough to see them." His words always stuck with me, and I think that's why I clicked on a link that night. It was a thread that caught my eye. No comments, no upvotes, just the title, "Unlock the Abyss." Beneath it was a single link. My curiosity got the best of me. The link took me to a completely black page with one line of white text. "Solve the puzzle, and you will discover the truth." Below that was a small box to enter an answer. I could feel my heart beating faster, the excitement of a challenge pulling me in. I had no idea what I was getting into, but it seemed like a harmless game at first, a test for someone who enjoys solving puzzles. So, I started. The first one was easy, just a simple cipher. I cracked it in minutes and moved on to the next. As I solved each puzzle, they grew increasingly difficult, requiring obscure historical knowledge, complex mathematics, and references I'd never even heard of. Still, I couldn't stop. I was hooked. As days turned into weeks, the puzzles consumed me. I spent every waking moment trying to solve them. I stopped hanging out with friends, ignored my family's calls, and barely ate. They started asking questions, wondering why I seemed so distant. I told them I was just stressed from work, but the truth was, I was too deep into this game to care about anything else. It wasn't just the puzzles, it was the promise of truth. I had to know what lay at the end of this twisted path. When I finally reached the last puzzle, it was like nothing I had ever seen before. It required a deep understanding of quantum physics, ancient languages, and cryptography. I had no idea how long I spent on it, but my obsession had turned into desperation. I wasn't solving this just for fun anymore. It felt like something bigger was at stake. When I finally cracked the code, the screen went black for a moment. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, white text appeared. "Welcome to the truth." Suddenly, I was redirected to a new page filled with encrypted files. I couldn't believe it. Was this some kind of joke? I quickly started decrypting them, and what I found made my blood run cold. These were government documents, heavily redacted, but still readable. The title of the first document I opened was Project Nexus. It detailed a top-secret operation involving experiments on time manipulation, reality shifts, and interdimensional travel. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, but this was real. The more I read, the more disturbed I became. There were mentions of strange occurrences, people disappearing, and creatures from beyond our reality slipping through cracks in space-time. The project was attempting to open portals to alternate dimensions, but the consequences were terrifying. The documents warned of reality unraveling, of time loops and paradoxes. It was hard to wrap my head around, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know more. That's when the strange things began happening. It started with my computer. Late at night, it would turn on by itself, the screen flickering with static. Then I began receiving anonymous emails. They contained cryptic warnings, telling me to stop what I was doing. At first, I brushed them off, thinking it was part of the game, but then my phone started ringing in the middle of the night. Every time I answered, there was nothing but static on the other end. The worst part? I felt like someone was watching me. One night, while decrypting another batch of files, I heard a knock at the door. It was almost midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart pounded as I approached the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows, but instead, there was only a small, unmarked envelope on the doorstep. Inside was a single piece of paper with one message typed in red ink. "Stop now, or you will regret it." That's when it hit me. I had gone too far. I tried to delete the files from my computer, but it froze every time I tried. My paranoia was growing, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I unplugged the computer, hoping that would be enough to stop whatever was happening, but it didn't. If anything, things got worse. Shadows started moving out of the corner of my eye, whispers filled the silence of my house, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was the lack of sleep or the stress from work, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. Something was happening to me. I tried to go back to my normal life, pretending everything was fine, but the paranoia followed me everywhere. I started noticing things, like the same black car parked near my house for hours on end. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but then I saw the car every day. Someone was watching me. The paranoia got so bad that I stopped sleeping altogether. Every little noise set me on edge. I barely left the house, and when I did, I always looked over my shoulder. Then, one night, while I was walking back home from the store, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows near my house. My heart raced, and I quickly turned away, taking a different path home. When I reached my front door, I found another envelope waiting for me. This time, there was a USB drive inside with a note. "You need to see this?" Against my better judgment, I plugged the drive into my offline computer. It contained video files, each one dated within the last month. The first video showed a group of people in what looked like a lab. They were conducting experiments, but it wasn't on anything I had ever seen before. These people were manipulating objects, small, ordinary items, by warping the space around them. As the video progressed, it became clear that these weren't ordinary scientists. They were part of Project Nexus, and they were toying with forces beyond human comprehension. The second video was worse. It showed people being subjected to these experiments, strapped to tables, injected with strange substances, and forced to endure what looked like time loops. They would scream in agony, reliving the same moments over and over again. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop watching. The final video was the most disturbing. It showed a man in a suit, standing in a dimly lit room. He looked directly at the camera and said, "To those who seek the truth, be warned. You are in over your head." After that, I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening. I had to know more, even if it put me in danger. I started digging deeper, going through the files and piecing together the project's dark history. What I found was horrifying. Project Nexus wasn't just about time manipulation or interdimensional travel. It was about control. The people behind it were trying to reshape reality itself, bending the rules of existence to suit their needs. And they were willing to go to any lengths to keep their secrets hidden. As I uncovered more, the harassment intensified. My phone glitched constantly, dropping calls and refusing to send messages. I started getting more anonymous emails, each one more threatening than the last. "Stop, or there will be consequences," one read. Another simply said, "You are being watched." The black car parked outside my house wasn't just a coincidence anymore. I was sure of it. Whoever was behind Project Nexus was watching my every move. One night, after days of paranoia and fear, the power in my house went out. I was sitting in the living room when everything went dark. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I made my way to the fuse box, trying to stay calm. Just as I was about to flip the switch, I heard footsteps behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around, shining the light from my phone into the darkness. Standing in the doorway was a man in a suit, his face blank and expressionless. "You need to stop," he said, his voice calm but cold. "You're in over your head." I was frozen in place, too terrified to move. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the house, disappearing into the night. The power flickered back on, and I was left standing there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. After that encounter, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had opened a door that couldn't be closed. There was no turning back now. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. So, I did what any rational person wouldn't. I dove deeper. I backed up all the files I had and encrypted them, just in case. I documented everything that had happened to me. The strange emails, the black car, the man in the suit. I knew I was putting myself in danger, but I couldn't stop. I reached out to a few trusted people, hinting that I might need their help soon. Days turned into weeks, and I continued my research. That's when I stumbled across something that shook me to my core. One of the documents I decrypted was labeled Reality Breach Incident. It described an experiment gone wrong, one where the fabric of reality had been torn apart, creating a rift between dimensions. The report claimed that the rift had been closed, but the consequences were severe. Time loops, people vanishing, entire locations shifting in and out of existence. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was as if the universe itself was breaking down, and the government was trying to patch it up, hiding the truth from the world. But there was something worse. The document hinted at beings, entities from beyond our dimension, that had slipped through the rift. Creatures that existed outside of our understanding of time and space. They were here, in our world, and the people behind Project Nexus were trying to control them. My hands shook as I read the final line of the document. Containment is critical. Failure will result in the collapse of reality. I knew then that this was bigger than I had ever imagined. I had to get out. I had to find help, but it felt like every move I made was being watched. The fear, the paranoia, it was suffocating. But there was no going back. I was in too deep. I couldn't shake the weight of what I had uncovered. The reality-bending experiments, the entities from beyond our dimension. It was all too much. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of madness, but I knew I couldn't stop. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was something bigger, something dangerous that could affect everyone. I needed to expose it. But how? Every step I took, every decision, was met with the suffocating paranoia that I was being watched. I knew I had to leave my house. I couldn't stay there any longer. Not with that black car parked outside my door every day, and the strange shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I packed a bag with the essentials, my laptop, hard drives with the encrypted files, and some clothes, and left. I had no clear plan, but I needed to disappear, at least for a little while, to figure out what to do next. I reached out to an old friend, someone I trusted, and asked if I could crash at their place. I didn't tell them the full story, only that I needed to lay low for a bit. Thankfully, they didn't ask too many questions. For the first few days, I felt safer, though not completely. The feeling of being watched never left me, like a dark cloud hanging just over my shoulder. I still saw strange cars parked near the house, and my phone glitched constantly. But at least here, I had a small window of time to regroup and plan. While staying with my friend, I continued combing through the remaining files. That's when I discovered something that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. It was a report about an experiment involving a phenomenon called a temporal fracture. It sounded like science fiction, but the document claimed that the government had successfully created fractures in time itself. Small pockets where time didn't flow naturally, where past, present, and future collided. These fractures could be manipulated, but they were unstable. The consequences of failure were catastrophic, potentially erasing entire timelines or trapping people in endless loops. One of the files described an experiment where several individuals had been subjected to this temporal manipulation. They were trapped in a loop, forced to relive the same moments over and over, with no memory of how long they had been stuck. It sounded like torture, worse than any physical pain I could imagine. As I read further, I realized that some of the people involved in the experiments had never been recovered. They were lost in time, their existence erased from our reality. This revelation chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just about alternate dimensions or interdimensional beings. These people were playing with time itself, rewriting history, manipulating reality to their will. I couldn't even fathom the implications of what they were doing, but something else nagged at me. What if these experiments weren't just accidents? What if they were deliberate? A means of control, a way to rewrite reality for those in power? I couldn't let this continue. But I was one person, up against an entire shadow organization that had the resources of the government at its disposal. I needed more than just files and encrypted documents. I needed hard evidence, proof that would be impossible to deny. I needed to get inside one of their facilities. That's when the nightmares started. At first, I thought it was just stress, but the dreams felt too real. I'd find myself trapped in a dark, endless corridor, doors slamming shut behind me as I ran, always chased by something I couldn't see. Every time I turned around, there was nothing, just the oppressive feeling that something terrible was just out of sight. Then, the dreams began to bleed into my waking life. I'd hear whispers, soft and incomprehensible, whenever I was alone. I'd see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, and when I turned, nothing would be there. Sleep-deprived and barely holding on to my sanity, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find the facility where Project Nexus was operating. I didn't have much to go on, just a few references to locations buried deep in the encrypted files, but it was enough to give me a starting point. With the help of my conspiracy theorist friend, who had always been into government cover-ups and secret projects, we started tracking down potential sites. It wasn't long before we found it. A hidden underground facility, deep in the mountains, surrounded by miles of wilderness. It was the perfect place to conduct secret experiments without anyone knowing. My friend was hesitant, warning me that we were walking into a death trap, but I had no choice. If I didn't find hard proof, the truth would remain buried forever. So, we packed up our gear and set off for the mountains. The journey to the facility was grueling. We hiked for days, following the GPS coordinates we had pieced together from the files. The deeper we went into the wilderness, the more isolated I felt, as if the world itself was slowly disappearing behind us. By the time we reached the hidden entrance, a rusted metal door built into the side of a mountain, I was exhausted, physically and mentally. But the sight of that door filled me with a strange sense of resolve. This was it. This was the place where they were conducting their reality-bending experiments. This was where it all began. The door was locked, but my friend managed to hack into the security system. As we stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and the hum of machinery. The facility looked abandoned, but I knew better. The deeper we went, the more unsettling it became. The walls were lined with old equipment, strange devices I didn't recognize, and symbols I had seen before in the files. Symbols that seemed to defy logic. Then we reached the heart of the facility, a large chamber with a massive machine at its center. I didn't understand its full function, but I knew this was the key to everything. Monitors around the room showed shifting images of people, places, and events, but they flickered and warped as though time itself was being manipulated. It was Project Nexus, in full operation. That's when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, growing louder with each step. My heart pounded in my chest as I frantically looked around for a place to hide. My friend, wide-eyed and panicked, tugged at my arm, pulling me behind a row of metal cabinets filled with old, dusty equipment. We crouched down, barely breathing, as the footsteps drew closer. I could hear voices now, low, indistinct murmurs, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I risked a glance around the edge of the cabinet and saw two figures enter the room, both dressed in dark, tactical gear. They didn't look like scientists. They were soldiers, or maybe something worse. They carried themselves with the cold efficiency of men who had done this before, clearing the room with sharp, practiced movements. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find us. My mind raced. How had they known we were here? Had the security system tipped them off? Or had they been watching us from the moment we set foot near the facility? Either way, it didn't matter now. We were trapped, and if they found us, I had no doubt they would kill us without hesitation. One of the men stopped near the console, typing something into the machine. The giant device in the center of the room began to hum, the monitors flickering faster as the images shifted in and out of focus. It was like watching different realities bleed together. Faces appeared and disappeared, landscapes twisted and warped, and there were brief glimpses of strange, alien places that defied explanation. "This is it," my friend whispered, barely audible. "This is where they're doing it. Manipulating time, space, everything." I nodded, my throat dry. I had imagined what Project Nexus might look like, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. The machine wasn't just tampering with time or space. It was bending reality, reshaping it according to whoever controlled it. And I realized, with growing horror, that this wasn't just an experiment. This was a weapon. The men moved toward a side door, disappearing into a hallway, leaving the machine humming behind them. We waited until the sound of their footsteps faded before daring to move. My friend tugged on my sleeve, urging me to get out, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed evidence, something concrete to expose what they were doing here. I crept forward toward the console, my hands shaking as I began to snap pictures with my phone. The screens showed layers of encrypted data, simulations of different timelines, experiments that had caused fractures in reality. One monitor displayed a map of temporal fractures across the globe, places where time wasn't flowing naturally, just as the files had described. I didn't understand all of it, but I didn't need to. The pictures alone would be enough to prove that this place existed. As I scrolled through the data, something else caught my eye. One of the screens showed a live feed, a room somewhere deeper within the facility. Inside the room was a massive containment chamber, surrounded by thick glass walls. But it wasn't the chamber that chilled me to the bone. It was what was inside. A creature. Not human. It was humanoid in shape, but taller than any man, with translucent skin and dark, inky veins running beneath the surface. Its eyes were enormous, black and unblinking, and its mouth was filled with sharp, needle-like teeth. It was alive, but barely. It moved sluggishly, its body restrained by thick metal cables that ran through the chamber. I felt my stomach churn. This was one of them. One of the beings that had slipped through the rifts in reality. It was grotesque, unnatural, and it shouldn't have existed in our world. But here it was, contained and studied like a lab rat. The scientists behind Project Nexus hadn't just opened a door between dimensions. They had brought something through. My friend glanced over my shoulder and recoiled in horror. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was spinning with the implications of what we were seeing. The government wasn't just bending reality for fun. They were exploiting it, using it, and this creature, whatever it was, had become part of their twisted experiments. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the facility, a piercing wail that sent my heart into overdrive. The screen in front of me flashed red. Intruder detected. They know we're here. My friend's voice was high with panic. "We've got to go now." I stuffed my phone into my pocket, adrenaline surging as we bolted from the chamber. I could hear the distant thudding of boots on metal floors as more guards converged on our location. My mind raced. We had the evidence, photos of the machine, the creature, the data, but now we had to make it out alive. We sprinted down the narrow corridor, our footsteps echoing in the sterile, dimly lit hallways. I had no idea where we were going, just that we had to get as far away from that alarm as possible. Every corner we turned, I expected to run headfirst into another guard, but somehow we remained unseen. The facility was a labyrinth of metal and concrete, each hallway more confusing than the last. Just when I thought we might actually make it out, a door at the end of the corridor slid open, and two more soldiers stepped through. They raised their weapons, shouting commands I couldn't hear over the pounding in my ears. My friend shoved me hard, sending me stumbling to the side as he ran the other way. "Go. I'll distract them." "No," I shouted, but it was too late. He was already sprinting down the opposite hallway, the soldiers chasing after him. I froze for a second, torn between helping him and saving myself. But I knew that if I didn't escape, everything we had found would be for nothing. I had to make it out. I had to tell the world. I turned and ran. The facility felt endless. Every hallway looked the same. Every door led to more winding paths, but eventually, I found an exit. A service door that led to a tunnel, sloping upward toward the surface. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my legs aching, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, I burst through the door at the end of the tunnel and into the cold night air. The sky above was dark, the stars barely visible through the thick clouds, but I didn't care. I was free. For now. I didn't stop running until I reached the treeline, collapsing against a large rock, gasping for breath. My mind was still racing, the images of the creature and the machine flashing through my thoughts. My friend was still back there, and I didn't know if he would make it out alive. But I couldn't go back. Not yet. I pulled out my phone, staring at the pictures I had taken. The evidence was there. Now I had to figure out what to do with it, and how to stay alive long enough to expose the truth. I had uncovered something far bigger than I ever could have imagined. Now, the real danger began. I sat in the cold, trembling. My breath came in ragged gasps, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I kept staring at the pictures on my phone, cycling through them as if they might vanish if I looked away. The eerie glow of the containment chamber, the creature bound within it, the machine warping reality. It was all there. Proof. But with it came a crushing sense of responsibility. What was I supposed to do with this? Who could I trust? I needed to get as far away from the facility as possible. My friend, God, I didn't even know if he was alive. He had sacrificed himself so I could escape, but I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at my chest. I had to find a way to get this out. But every instinct screamed that the people behind Project Nexus were already hunting me. I wasn't naive enough to think I'd just walk away from this. I needed to move fast and stay off the radar. First things first, I had to get back to civilization. I was deep in the wilderness, far from any help. The facility had been built in the middle of nowhere for a reason, and I had a long trek ahead of me. I knew the mountain road we had driven up was at least a day's walk, maybe more. I started moving, keeping low and trying to stay hidden in the shadows. Every sound in the woods made me jump, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. I was sure someone, or something, was out there, watching me. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, the images from the facility replayed over and over in my mind. That creature. It hadn't been human, but there was something worse about it. The way it moved, the hollow, empty look in its eyes, like it had seen horrors I couldn't even imagine. And that machine, whatever it was doing, it felt like a violation of nature itself. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something I wasn't supposed to, something humanity wasn't meant to know. By the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept, and my body ached from the relentless pace I'd been keeping. But there was no stopping now. I was too afraid to slow down. As I approached the gravel road, relief washed over me. There was no sign of anyone from the facility, no black cars tailing me. At least not yet. I found a spot hidden behind some trees and waited for a car to pass. Eventually, a small pickup truck rattled down the road. I waved it down, hoping the driver wouldn't ask too many questions. An old man with kind eyes and a grizzled beard pulled over. He glanced at me, clearly puzzled by my disheveled appearance, but didn't ask too much. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice rough but friendly. I nodded, grateful. "Yeah, just trying to get back to town," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't pry, and for that, I was thankful. I climbed into the passenger seat, slumping against the worn leather as exhaustion finally caught up with me. The ride was bumpy, and the silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional small talk the old man offered. My mind was elsewhere, racing through my options. As we neared the outskirts of town, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. My heart jumped into my throat. I hesitated, then answered. "You're in danger," the voice on the other end said, low and urgent. "They know where you are." I froze. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There's no time. You need to get off the grid, now. You have less than an hour before they find you." The call disconnected before I could respond. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they sounded dead serious. And that only meant one thing. I had been tracked. I thanked the driver as he dropped me off near the town, but I didn't linger. I couldn't. My mind was a blur, trying to figure out my next move. I ducked into a nearby alley, pulling my phone out again. I had to destroy it. They were using it to track me. I stared at the screen for a moment longer, knowing that with every second, they were closing in. Then I smashed it against the concrete, shattering it into pieces. That would buy me some time, but not much. I had to disappear. I had no choice but to go underground, completely off the grid. But I couldn't disappear without sending the evidence to someone first. I found an old internet cafe, a place where cash was accepted and anonymity was possible. Inside, I bought a cheap burner laptop, paying in cash and using a fake name. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling the weight of invisible eyes following me. I needed to send the files to someone trustworthy. Someone who could expose this without getting killed or silenced. I thought about the journalists I had read over the years, those who had broken big government cover-ups, people who weren't afraid of the truth. I sent the files to 3 different sources, encrypting everything, along with a message. Project Nexus. The truth must come out. As I hit send, a deep sense of dread washed over me. I had done it, but the danger was far from over. I couldn't stay in one place. I knew they'd come for me next, and I had no illusions about what they'd do once they found me. I left the cafe and kept moving. My mind raced, planning my next steps. I needed to get out of the country, maybe even change my identity. The people behind Project Nexus were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secret. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I had uncovered the truth, and now it was out in the world. As I walked through the streets, blending into the crowd, I felt the familiar prickle of paranoia crawling up my spine. Somewhere out there, they were looking for me. But for now, I was free. The truth was out there now. All I could do was hope that it would be enough to expose them, and that I could stay one step ahead of the darkness that was closing in around me. I walked aimlessly through the streets for what felt like hours, trying to think clearly despite the overwhelming dread that clouded my mind. Every time I passed a stranger, I wondered if they were watching me, if they were part of the shadowy forces behind Project Nexus. The thought was suffocating, and the weight of my paranoia pressed heavily on my chest. I couldn't trust anyone, not after everything I'd seen. I found myself in the back streets of the town, the kind of place where nobody asked questions. Old, dilapidated buildings loomed over me, casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. I needed to rest, but I couldn't afford to stay anywhere obvious. A motel would be too easy to track. Instead, I found a small, run-down hostel at the edge of town. I paid in cash and gave them a fake name. The clerk barely looked at me, a blessing given my ragged state. Once inside the tiny room, I locked the door behind me, pulled the curtains closed, and slumped onto the bed. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to exhale deeply, but the relief was short-lived. I could still feel the weight of the burner laptop in my bag, like a ticking time bomb. I had sent the files, but would it be enough? Or had I just signed my own death warrant? I stared at the cracked ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. The journalists I had contacted, would they even believe what I'd sent them? The files were damning, but they seemed impossible, like something out of a paranoid conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Who would believe that the government was tampering with reality itself? That they had captured beings from other dimensions? That they were creating fractures in time? I couldn't think straight. Exhaustion pulled at me, and I hadn't eaten in over a day. I knew I should try to sleep, but every noise outside made me jump. My eyes darted to the small window, expecting to see black-suited men standing there, ready to break in and finish what they had started. I didn't know how long I sat there, heart racing, staring at the shadows in the room. Eventually, fatigue won out, and I slipped into a restless sleep. My dreams were chaotic, a blur of distorted realities, shifting timelines, and the creature I had seen in the containment chamber. It moved through my nightmares, its empty black eyes following me, its mouth opening in a soundless scream. I woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat. The room was dark now, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. The fear was suffocating, a heavy, oppressive weight on my chest. It was too quiet, too still. I reached for my phone instinctively, but of course it was gone. Destroyed. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the door. A soft thud, barely audible, but enough to send a wave of terror through me. I froze, listening. My heart pounded in my ears as I slowly rose from the bed, creeping toward the door. Another thud, followed by the faintest creak of the floorboards just outside the room. Someone was there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a lamp from the bedside table, and held my breath, waiting. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Then, the door handle rattled, ever so slightly. I gripped the lamp tighter, my pulse racing. Whoever was out there wasn't just passing by. They were trying to get in. There was a pause, then a soft knock. I stayed frozen, my heart in my throat. The knock came again, louder this time. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. "Open the door," a voice said, muffled through the thin wood. It was calm, too calm. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. My mind raced. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe they were here to kill me. But something about the voice was unsettlingly familiar. "We know you're in there," the voice continued. "If we wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't have knocked." I hesitated, my grip on the lamp loosening slightly. There was something strange about the way they spoke. No malice, no threat, just a cool, detached tone that unnerved me even more. "Let me in, or I'll have to force my way in," the voice said, the calmness giving way to a slight edge. I had no choice. If they were part of whatever organization was behind Project Nexus, they wouldn't hesitate to break down the door. I stepped forward and slowly unlocked the door, my hand shaking. The door swung open, and standing there was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in casual clothes that seemed too ordinary for the situation. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, studying me with cold precision. She stepped inside before I could react, closing the door behind her. "You've caused quite a stir," she said, her voice as steady as ever. She didn't seem surprised to see me holding a lamp like a weapon. "Who are you?" I asked, my throat dry. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Someone who knows more than you think." I backed away slightly, my mind reeling. "What do you want?" She took a seat on the edge of the bed, her demeanor calm and unsettlingly composed. "I'm here to help you, or at least, to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Not yet, anyway. I couldn't trust her, not after everything I'd been through. But there was something about her, an air of authority, like she knew exactly what she was doing. And, for now, she wasn't acting like she wanted to hurt me. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, still gripping the lamp. "Because if I wanted to kill you, you wouldn't have heard me knock," she said, with the faintest hint of amusement. Then her expression grew serious. "You've stepped into something much bigger than you realize. And if you want to survive, you're going to need allies." I studied her, unsure of what to say. She was right. I didn't stand a chance on my own. But how could I trust her? She must have sensed my hesitation because she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "You've seen what they're capable of," she said. "You've seen the creatures, the experiments, the fractured realities. Do you really think you can survive this alone?" I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. She was right about one thing. I was in way over my head, and if I had any hope of getting out of this alive, I needed more than just evidence. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her jacket. "For now, I want you to stay alive. You have information they can't afford to let slip, and that makes you dangerous." She walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "I'll be in touch. Don't try to run, and don't trust anyone else. If they find you before I do, you won't live long enough to regret it." With that, she slipped out the door, leaving me standing there, shaken and more confused than ever. I had no idea who she was or what her true motives were. But one thing was clear. The game had changed. And I wasn't the only one playing anymore. I sat in the cold, trembling as the weight of the situation bore down on me. The forest around me was dark, oppressive, and deathly quiet. It had been hours since I fled the underground facility, and though I was far from the nightmare I had uncovered, the feeling of being hunted hadn't left me. My heart raced as I thought about the creature. No, the thing, trapped behind glass in the chamber. Its black, soulless eyes had pierced through me, even from behind layers of reinforced glass. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in this world. And yet, here I was, running from it, from them. The government, the scientists behind Project Nexus, they weren't just tampering with reality. They were opening doors to places humans were never meant to reach. They had torn open the fabric of existence, and now, something terrible had slipped through. I had the proof, but that proof was a death sentence. If they didn't find me, that thing, those things, would. I couldn't stop thinking about my friend, the one who stayed behind to distract the guards. Was he still alive? Had he made it out? Or worse, had he become one of them? The thought sent a chill through my bones. I had seen enough in the files to know that whatever was going on, people were disappearing. They weren't just killed or silenced. They were erased from reality itself, like they never existed. I made my way down a narrow trail, the trees around me towering like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting in unnatural ways. I needed to find shelter, somewhere to think, but every time I paused, I felt eyes on me. Eyes from the shadows, from places where the light of my flashlight couldn't reach. The air was cold, and the wind howled through the trees. But underneath that, I heard something else. A whisper. Faint, distant, like it was carried on the wind. It was impossible to make out the words, but they were there. I knew I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. The vibration made me jump. It was an unknown number again. I had destroyed my real phone, but this burner had somehow been compromised. Slowly, I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? There was a long, heavy pause on the other end. Then, a voice, quiet and unnatural, whispered back, You can't run. They're already inside. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my mind spinning. Inside? What did that mean? Were they in the forest? Were they in my head? I dropped the phone, backing away from it as if it were some kind of cursed object. My breathing quickened, my chest tight with fear. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted forms growing darker, more sinister. I had to keep moving. I couldn't let them find me, whoever or whatever they were. I stumbled through the underbrush, heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were getting louder now, no longer carried by the wind, but growing from deep within the woods themselves. And worse, they weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, many voices, all speaking in low, menacing tones. They knew where I was. I found a clearing and stopped, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. My flashlight flickered, the beam of light weak and unreliable. I didn't have much time before the batteries died completely. My mind raced with thoughts of what was out there, watching me. The thing from the containment chamber flashed in my mind again, its mouth filled with jagged, needle-like teeth. But there was more. There had been others, beings that looked almost human, but weren't. Beings that had been changed by the experiments, twisted into something else, something worse. Then I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves behind me. I froze. My heart was beating so hard, I thought it would burst from my chest. Slowly, I turned, the flashlight shaking in my hand. A figure stood just outside the circle of light. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was there, watching. My stomach churned with fear, my legs rooted in place. The figure took a step forward, the sound of leaves and twigs snapping underfoot. It was tall, too tall to be human, its limbs long and unnatural, and it was moving toward me, slow but deliberate. I took a step back, my foot catching on a root. I stumbled, falling to the ground with a thud. The flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling a few feet away. The beam flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows that danced along the trees. But I could still see it, see them. More figures emerging from the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They moved silently, like predators stalking their prey. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight and swinging it wildly in every direction. But they were everywhere. In the trees, in the shadows, closing in. A voice, deep and otherworldly, echoed through the clearing. You've seen too much. I turned, pointing the flashlight at the source of the voice. But there was nothing, just empty darkness. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I was trapped. There was nowhere to run. Suddenly, the air around me grew cold, unnaturally cold. Frost began to form on the ground, creeping up the trees like a living thing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, overlapping in a chaotic chorus of voices that clawed at my mind. I could barely think, barely breathe. Then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around and swinging the flashlight, but there was nothing, just emptiness. My vision blurred, and the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. I was losing control, losing my grip on reality. You can't hide from them, the voice from the phone had said. They're already inside. I staggered forward, my legs trembling, my mind spinning with fear. The whispers were inside my head now, echoing in the darkest corners of my thoughts. I wasn't just being hunted. They had entered me, invaded my mind, twisting everything I saw, everything I thought I knew. The clearing began to warp, the trees bending and contorting like living things. I stumbled again, falling to my knees as the ground seemed to ripple beneath me. My vision blurred further, and I could feel the presence of the beings. Those twisted, unnatural creatures, closing in. I was no longer running from them. They were inside me. The whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else. My mind was fracturing, reality crumbling around me like a shattered mirror. And in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. I had never left the facility. Everything I had experienced, escaping, the woods, the phone calls, had all been part of their experiment. I was still trapped inside, caught in one of their twisted temporal fractures. My reality had been rewritten, bent to their will. I had never escaped. I never would. And as the darkness closed in around me, the voices whispered one final, chilling word. Welcome to the abyss. Then everything went black. Well, folks, that's the end of this terrifying story. If you enjoyed the chills and the twists, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps out. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more creepy tales just like this. I've got plenty more stories coming your way, so turn on the notifications and join me as we dive deeper into the unknown. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.